In the American West, the dust from the trails mixed with the smell of gunpowder, and ordinary men became legends behind their holsters. In this series, we're going to discover the 15 shooters who left a lasting mark on the frontier and on the American imagination, people with steady hands, cold aim, and a reputation that could make an entire town hold its breath. Stick with us, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments which of these guys stirs your imagination the most. Number 15. William Brochious. Known as Curly Bill for the dark curls no one could tame, William Brochious became a key figure on the Arizona frontier. In Tombstone, he walked around like the kind of guy who knew exactly who ran every corner, seeing the saloon, the cattle yard, and the politician's office as pieces of the same game. After Old Man Clanton was killed, Curly Bill became the most visible face of the cowboys, a group of cattle rustlers and gunslingers tired of rules coming from far away. They stole herds, crossed the region down into Mexico, and at the same time worked legally, collecting fees under the protection of Sheriff John Behan in Cochise County. Out there, law and crime often rode the same horse. Curly Bill drank hard, and one night, when he handed his revolver to Marshal Fred White, it went off and hit the officer. On his deathbed, White said he believed it was an accident, and Wyatt Earp testified in Brochious's favor, securing his release. Months later, near Iron Springs, came the showdown. Earp and Curly Bill faced each other in open ground. Most accounts say that's where Earp finally took Brochious down. Diarist George Parsons wrote that Curly Bill was the most famous outlaw in Arizona, a summary of a time when the power of a gun still decided who was in charge. Number 14. Clay Allison. Clay Allison was born in Tennessee and grew up in a country about to tear itself apart in the Civil War. He fought for the Confederates but was discharged after a head injury. A lot of people say he was never the same after that, explosive, suspicious, and quick on the trigger, just like the frontier, where the law didn't always get there first. After the war, Allison headed west, driving cattle and solving problems the way many men did back then, looking someone in the eye and, if needed, settling it with a gun in hand. He became known in saloons across Texas and New Mexico, where fights could turn into duels in a matter of seconds. One of the most talked-about episodes was his encounter with the gunman Chunk Colbert. They ate together, talked like old acquaintances, and then Colbert tried to draw his revolver. Allison was faster. When someone asked why he'd sat at a table with a man who wanted him dead, he answered bluntly. He wasn't about to send anyone to hell on an empty stomach. The end, though, didn't come in a shootout. In 1887, Clay fell from a wagon and broke his neck. He died like many ordinary men, but left behind the reputation of a tough character who believed he was delivering justice in a place where the government felt like something written far off on a map. Number 13. Sam Bass. Sam Bass didn't start out as an outlaw. Still young, he left his violent uncle and went to earn a living at a sawmill in Mississippi. Like many men of the time, he dreamed of the open West, horses, the road, and freedom, and eventually made his way to Texas, the country's new frontier. There, he tried life as a cowboy, driving cattle on long, grueling trails, but he realized that didn't pay enough. In 1876, he teamed up with Joel Collins to take a herd of longhorns north, where the cattle were worth more. The sale brought in about $8,000. Instead of returning and paying the owners, the two kept the money and blew it all gambling in towns like Deadwood. Broke, and with no honest way out, they turned down another path, robbing stagecoaches on western roads. After several small hits, they decided to aim higher. They attacked a Union Pacific train coming from San Francisco and took more than $60,000, remembered as the biggest single-train robbery on that railroad line. From then on, Bass became a target for the law. His last stop was in Round Rock, Texas, during a planned bank robbery. Shot in a confrontation, he died 2 days later, on his 27th birthday, leaving behind a short story of courage, ambition, and choices that put him on the wrong side of the law in the era of the Old West. Number 12. Jim Miller, Outlaw. On Sunday mornings, James Deacon Jim Miller sat in church with a Bible in his hand. No alcohol, no cigarettes. What almost no one knew was that, far from the hymns, he made his living as a hired gun, taking jobs against any target as long as the pay ranged from about $150 to around $2,000. Miller didn't care for high-noon duels. He preferred ambushes in the dark, behind fences or barns. He wore a long black coat, and underneath it, a steel breastplate that stopped bullets others thought were fatal. Researchers confidently link at least 14 deaths to his name, but saloon talk put the number closer to 50. In 1909 in Oklahoma, he was accused of sending farmer A.A. Gus Bobbitt to his grave. The town didn't want to wait for judge or jury. A mob pulled Miller and 3 other men from the jail and took them to an empty stable. There, with the rope ready, he asked that his wedding ring be sent to his wife, a relative of gunslinger John Wesley Hardin, and that they let him keep his hat on. Before anyone could move, he simply said, "Let her rip," and jumped. The 4 bodies hung there for hours in plain sight, a reminder that in the Old West, Sunday faith didn't erase the trail of blood left in the dust. Number 11. The Sundance Kid. Born Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, he became the Sundance Kid after being arrested for stealing a horse in the town of Sundance, Wyoming. It was a time when the government barely reached the interior, and many saw these young riders as outlaws, but also as products of a tough frontier where every man looked out for himself. When he got out of jail, he teamed up with Robert Leroy Parker, the famous Butch Cassidy, and with other partners formed the Wild Bunch, a gang that robbed trains and banks with almost military discipline. There's no solid record that Sundance ever killed anyone, which leaves open the question of whether he was a murderer or just a fast-shooting thief trying to survive in a country growing way too fast. With Pinkerton detectives on their trail, Sundance, Cassidy, and Etta Place crossed the border and ended up in South America. Official reports say he died in a shootout in Bolivia. But, as many patriotic Americans like to point out, the West produces more legend than letterhead. Some relatives swear he returned to Utah under the name William Henry Long and died in 1936. To this day, DNA tests try to close that chapter, as if the country still wants to know where the real story ends and the myth begins. Number 10. Belle Starr. Born Myra Maybelle. Surely in Carthage, Missouri, Belle grew up in an America shaped by the Civil War, where the line between hero and outlaw was thin. She went to a good school, played piano, and came from a respected family, but she had childhood ties with Cole Younger and later got close to Jesse and Frank James. The Shirley farm became a stopping point for outlaws running from sheriffs and bounty hunters. In 1866, she married Jim Reed, a former Confederate guerrilla. The couple tried living a straight life in the countryside, but money ran short, and Reed joined the Starr family, Cherokees involved in horse theft. Belle started using her cool head to plan robberies, hide outlaws, and negotiate stolen goods. Reed was eventually killed in a law action, and she moved on, becoming increasingly known in the Indian Territory. In 1880, Belle partnered with Sam Starr and dove back into crime. Horse theft, trials, jail time, and nearby, judges and deputies who sometimes seemed to respect that determined woman. On February 3, 1889, while riding home, she was shot in the back. No one was convicted. Since then, for many Americans, Belle Starr has become a symbol of that frontier where the law existed, but the ones who truly ruled were those unafraid to live outside it. Number 9. Bill Doolin. Bill Doolin was born in 1858 on a farm in Arkansas, in a country just coming out of the Civil War. Like many young men, he looked west and saw chances for work and land. He became a cowboy on a big ranch near the Cimarron River in Indian Territory, run by a Texan named Oscar D. Halsell. There he learned to read, do arithmetic, and drive cattle for weeks on end, sleeping on the ground and living in the saddle like any man of the frontier. For years, he was just another honest ranch hand. But the arrival of railroads, banks, and big money changed everything. Doolin crossed the line of the law and formed the Wild Bunch, the Doolin-Dalton gang. They hit banks, trains, and stagecoaches in Kansas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma Territory, using small towns, hidden trails, and the slow reach of federal justice. To many farmers and shopkeepers, they were proof that the government was still way too far away. After escaping from a jail in Guthrie in 1896, Washington decided enough was enough. Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas was given the mission to hunt him down. Near Lawson, Oklahoma, he cornered Doolin one night and ordered him to surrender. The outlaw drew his gun, lost the fight, and his body was taken to Guthrie for identification, a sign that from then on, the Old West would have to answer to the laws of the United States. Number 8. Cherokee Bill Crawford. Goldsby was born to a Cherokee mother and a black father in a corner of territory with little law watching over it. As a young man, he left honest work and turned to crime. He earned the nickname Cherokee Bill and became talked about all across Indian Territory, an area that would later become part of Oklahoma. He and his gang robbed stores, trains, and farms, keeping settlers and shopkeepers on edge. Reports link him to at least 8 deaths, including that of his own brother-in-law, killed in a family fight that got out of hand. For nearly 2 years, Bill slipped away from pauses and federal deputies until he was captured and taken to Fort Smith. There he faced a new trial, short and to the point. The jury found him guilty. The sentence fell to Judge Isaac C. Parker, known for enforcing law and order on the frontier, and he set the punishment as hanging. Bill's lawyers appealed to the Supreme Court in Washington, but the verdict stood. In March 1896, with crowds gathered to see the end of the famous outlaw, the 20-year-old walked up to the gallows. Asked if he had any last words, he said he'd come to die, not to make a speech. Afterward, his mother took his body to the Cherokee Cemetery near Fort Gibson, and the name Cherokee Bill lived on as an example of how the frontier could turn a boy into a bloody legend. Number 7. Doc Holliday. John Henry. Doc. Holliday started out as a dentist, living a steady life. Tuberculosis shut that plan down. The doctor was clear. If he wanted to live a little longer, he needed the dry air of the West. Doc closed his practice, said goodbye to his family, and boarded a train toward the frontier, where poker, whiskey, and revolvers were part of everyday life. At the tables, he discovered that a cool-headed gambler could make in one night what he wouldn't earn in weeks seeing patients. Quiet, but always armed, he was soon seen as a dangerous man. In Texas, he supposedly took Wyatt Earp's side in a saloon fight. That moment built the partnership remembered to this day, the firm lawman and his thin, sick friend ready to pull the trigger for him. Following Wyatt, Doc reached Tombstone, Arizona, a town of silver and trouble. The group known as the Cowboys had more power than the authorities, and they spread rumors that Holliday was a thief just like them. Tension boiled over near the OK Corral when they were ordered to give up their guns, and everything turned into a firefight with bodies on the ground, a scene that helped cement the classic image of the Old West. Sick and hunted, Doc ended up in Colorado. He died young, but remains an example of a man many Americans still respect, full of flaws, but willing to risk his life to defend a friend and a shred of law. Number 6. Tom Horn. Born in 1860 in Missouri, Thomas Horn, Jr. grew up in a country still healing from the Civil War and pushing its frontier westward. Early on, he learned to handle horses, guns, and loneliness, an everyday routine for anyone living in that America of dust, cattle, and land disputes. As a young man, Horn got involved in ranch wars in New Mexico Territory, where cattlemen and local politicians hired gunmen to protect fences, herds, and business interests. Horn was called in when talking no longer worked, quiet, direct, and efficient, the kind of man who showed up, did the job, and left without a speech. Later, he worked for the Pinkerton Agency, hunting train robbers, stagecoach bandits, and anyone who challenged the authority of the big companies. His reputation grew. Some saw him as a defender of order in a rough land, others as a hired gun for whoever had the money. The turning point came with the accusation that he killed 14-year-old Willie Nickel, caught in the middle of a feud between sheepmen and cattlemen in Colorado. The trial was quick, relying more on Horn's reputation than on solid evidence. In 1903, he was hanged, and to this day people debate whether he was guilty or whether he became a scapegoat from an era when frontier justice didn't always walk hand in hand with the truth. Number 5. Butch Cassidy. Robert Leroy Parker was born into a simple Mormon family in Utah. He grew up doing hard work, learning early that life was tough, and that banks and the government almost always walked away with the biggest share. As a teenager, he worked on a ranch in Circleville, where he met Mike Cassidy, a cowboy who didn't trust authority. Mike taught the boy how to shoot, care for a horse, and never bow his head to injustice. Parker took his friend's last name, and the name Butch Cassidy started spreading across the West. He began with small crimes, the kind of thing a broke young man does to test the limits, but he soon realized freight trains and banks held far more money than any ranch. In 1889, he stepped into the big leagues with the Telluride bank robbery in Colorado, a planned job that brought in a good haul. With part of the money, he bought a ranch near Hole in the Wall, a remote area that served as a safe haven for outlaws. In the 1890s, Butch took charge of the Wild Bunch, a gang that became a major headache for bankers and railroads. How his story ends is up for debate. Official papers say he died in a shootout in Bolivia. Family and neighbors swear he slipped quietly back onto American soil and tried to grow old like a regular citizen, paying his bills and looking at the flag on his porch. Number 4. Thomas Coleman Younger. Cole. Younger was born in Missouri and came of age in the middle of the Civil War. Still a young man, he saw his father killed after a confrontation with a Union officer over accusations involving his sister. From that moment on, the conflict between North and South became personal. He joined Confederate guerrillas, took part in ambushes, and served in the Confederate Army until the surrender. When peace was signed, another struggle began. Ruined farms, occupation troops, and banks and railroads running things more than any farmer ever could. Cole refused to accept that quietly. Together with his brothers Jim and Bob and partners Jesse and Frank James, he stepped fully into the outlaw life. The gang started hitting trains, stagecoaches, and banks across several Midwestern states, chasing money and revenge. In 1876, during the Northfield, Minnesota bank robbery, townspeople fought back with guns right on Main Street. The shootout broke the gang apart. Cole was captured and sentenced to life in prison. After 25 years behind bars, he was granted parole. Old, carrying scars and bullets in his body, he traveled with Frank James telling his version of the war and saying he had turned to Christ. He died in 1916 trying to settle accounts with God, with the country, and with his own past. Number 3. Billy the Kid. At the end of the 19th century, as the frontier pushed forward, a skinny young man earned a kind of fame no one really wanted: Billy the Kid. The son of immigrants, he grew up watching judges and sheriffs side with wealthy merchants while small ranchers lost their land. In that world, learning to shoot wasn't an adventure. It was how you kept from being swallowed up. Billy found direction when he started working for rancher John Tunstall in Lincoln County, taking care of cattle. But Tunstall clashed with the group that controlled local business, led by Lawrence Murphy and James Doolin. When Tunstall was killed on a road, unarmed, Billy and the other cowhands got the message. Anyone who challenged the system would pay dearly. They accepted deputy badges, formed the regulators, and went after those responsible. But the territorial governor sided with Murphy, and on paper, the regulators quickly became outlaws. From then on, Billy lived with a target on his back. To distant newspapers, he was a cold-blooded killer. To many settlers, he was the kid who wouldn't bow his head. Legend says he killed 21 men. Research points to far fewer. His run ended in 1881, when Sheriff Pat Garrett surprised him in an adobe house. To this day, the story of that boy raises a question. Who really holds the power, the law or the money? Number 2. Jesse James. Born in September 1847 in rural Missouri, Jesse Woodson, James grew up in a country split between North and South. As a teenager, he and his older brother, Frank, joined Confederate guerrilla bands, the Bushwhackers, that fought through ambushes across Missouri and Kansas under leaders like William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson. After the Centralia Massacre in 1864, Jesse carried the mark of that ruthless conflict for the rest of his life. When the Civil War ended, peace didn't come for him. Missouri was full of resentment, defeated ex-soldiers, and banks tied to the new railroads. In that climate, Jesse, Frank, and the Younger brothers formed the James Younger Gang, robbing trains, banks, and stagecoaches throughout the Midwest. To many Southerners, they were rebels avenging the Confederacy's defeat. Some accounts claim Jesse killed more than a dozen men, but the numbers shift depending on who's telling the story. In 1882, living under a fake name, he was betrayed at home and shot in the back by Robert Ford, a gang member looking for reward money and a pardon. That's how the man of flesh and blood fell, while the legend, one that still captivates anyone drawn to the American Old West, was born. Number 1, John Wesley Hardin. The son of a preacher after the Civil War, John Wesley Hardin grew up hearing about heaven and hell, but seeing that on the frontier things were settled by force and at the barrel of a gun. Still young, in a defeated South occupied by agents of Washington, he got into a fight that started as bar provocation and ended with a man dead. From that moment on, Hardin was a wanted man. For years he lived in the saddle, following cattle trails, sleeping in cowboy camps, and passing through one-street towns where the idea of law and order had barely arrived. In Abilene, Kansas, he crossed paths with the famous lawman Wild Bill Hickok. There was respect between them, but Hardin had a short fuse. A conflict in a hotel ended in more gunfire and another dead man, and he hit the road again, with a reward on his head. When he was finally caught, he received a long sentence. In a Texas prison, he surprised people who only knew him by his gunslinger reputation. He studied, learned the law, and walked out as a lawyer, trying to present himself as a changed man. But the Old West didn't forget. In 1895, in El Paso, Hardin fell behind the counter of a saloon, shot in the back during a dice game, closing the story of a man who lived on the edge between law, honor, and violence in a nation still being built.